On behalf of St. Jude Parish, and especially in the name of the Speaker Series committee members, I welcome all of you here to Blessed Sacrament Chapel and those joining us by way of live stream. Thank you for being with us for the wonderful evening we have planned for you. I was able to see so many of you personally already, but also want to acknowledge Mike Aquilina. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. We're very honored by your presence, the presence of you all. The Speaker Series of St. Jude's Parish was founded in the Catholic intellectual tradition. This tradition has developed over the centuries and has long held the truth is too vast for any one expression to fully encompass. It aims to form the entire person, the whole person, rather than the intellect alone. So Catholic thought and tradition, in its purest sense, is animated by a sacramental awareness of the ways in which the divine is manifest in the created world, in history, in the imagination, especially in the arts, and always in the human heart. Thus, you can understand why we chose to conduct this evening's program in our chapel setting. And it is in this spirit that I sincerely welcome everyone to an enjoyable, in-depth look at reality through the transcendent lens of poetry. Can we begin with a prayer? And I know we want to start first in silence for the good people in Ukraine. We're all worried about their suffering already, but I know our prayer will help. So in silence, may we offer that part of the prayer. Now let us pray. Lord, you invite us out of isolation into a community whose efforts desire to contribute to the construction of a whole. A wholeness, please God, that is a Catholic hallmark. Unite in us this evening goodwill and a love and respect for people everywhere that seeks beauty and always the presence of love. Bless the poet in each of us that helps us to heal the soul of all humanity. Amen. And now I'm pleased to introduce to you a very special guest, Anne Burnham. Anne is one of the bright lights in our city with her own poetry and writings, read with her lovely Irish brogue and from her warm heart. Anne made me promise that I would not put the spotlight on her, so I won't tell you that this special evening would not be happening without her. She really helped to arrange this, for which we are grateful. I wish our audience and listeners at home could hear Anne reading her poetry, but maybe we can all convince her to come back and do that someday for us. Anne, I understand your home is always a friendly gathering place. I hope you feel at home with us at St. Jude's this evening. I now invite you to the podium to introduce our guests.
My mother called me a foghorn. So if you don't hear me, I'll use the mic. But if you hear me, that's okay. It's probably better. But Father Joe, thank you so much for those warm and welcoming words to everyone who's gathered here in this beautiful, serene chapel, and to all the friends and the fans of Sam Hazo who are here, who are with us through this magic of streaming around Pittsburgh and from as far away as Manila, Kuwait, and from all around the United States. It's an enormous tribute to Sam that people want to be with him tonight, to his incredible reputation as a teacher and a mentor, as a great friend, and as someone whose influence still inspires all of us. And so I'm absolutely delighted and grateful that Mary Lou asked me to introduce Sam tonight. Mary Lou is the super organizer of this wonderful series. And so for me, it's a great privilege and a pleasure to be here. Now, I know people who are asked to introduce often say that. It's a privilege and a pleasure, but for me it's particularly so. I had the privilege of working with Sam Hazo for over 15 years at the International Poetry Forum. And I had the pleasure of performing with him in International Poetry Forum programs around the region. So this is unequivocally correct. And it's really something to be present and to watch, to have been present and to have watched Sam over all those years and to see in him the kind of integrity, imagination, and what I would call the spiritual and intellectual purposefulness, it's a long word, of his life. And as I grew to know Sam, and as I grew to spend time with him, I realized that he embodies the incredible last lines of Robert Frost's great poem, Two Tramps in Mud Time. And in that poem, Frost says that in a life, to have true and lasting value, vocation and avocation need to be united. As he says, as my two eyes make one in sight. And only when that happens, he says, is the deed ever really done for heaven's and the future's sake. And in his extraordinary life, Sam, through his poetry and through his work as a teacher, he has done that. He has married his avocation and his vocation so perfectly that they have become one, and you could not separate them. As a writer, as a fiction, of plays, essays, translations, criticisms, notable guest editorials to certain publications where errant feet are held to the fire, and especially and above all in his poetry, where what he says, his felt thought and utterance channels, disturbs, amazes, enlivens, wounds, and ultimately affirms us, making us more human, more alive, more clearly ourselves, and understanding ourselves because we see ourselves mirrored in the words of his poems. And this belief in the power of poetry to change people, to affirm people's lives, to make them alive, inspired Sam to create the International Poetry Forum. And through the forum, he brought what I would call the A-list of the world's best poets to Pittsburgh to read their works in person, to the eyes and the ears of audiences who wanted to hear poetry. And he created a receptive audience, an audience that was, in a sense, hungry for such poetry. And if you think about the cavalcade of poets that came through Pittsburgh, it's extraordinary. And I could recite them probably like the Litany of the Saints. Archibald MacLeish, Yevgeny Yevtushenko, Seamus Heaney, of course. Czesław Miłosz, who when he came back for the second time to Pittsburgh said, "Ah yes, Sam, you invited me before the Nobel." Anne Sexton, Annie Dillard, John Berryman, Wendell Berry, Octavio Paz, the list goes on and on. And most people who came to the Poetry Forum in those days, they didn't necessarily know who the poet was or what the poet was going to talk about, but they trusted Sam implicitly because of his ear for poetry, because of his understanding of what a real, good, honest poem is. And so they came, and they came faithfully. And it was an extraordinary thing to be there in that atmosphere of listening. And I remember once that Sam went to a regular attendee, a man who stood at the back of the Carnegie Lecture Hall, just stood and listened. He was the owner of an auto body shop in Pittsburgh. And Sam asked him why he came to the forum. And he said, because listening to these nights of poetry keeps me honest. And he was right. Honest because in a poem, you can't prevaricate, you can't grandstand, you can't propagandize, you can't be egotistical. A poem doesn't exist if that is the case. And honest also because poetry requires us to look at ourselves, to examine who we are, and to feel what the poet feels, and to reflect ourselves against his words or her words. And it was an extraordinary thing. Sam, in essence, changed the whole atmosphere of poetry. He took it out of the academy and brought it into the lives of ordinary people. And that man's honesty was also because, as I said, it takes courage to hear a poem. It takes courage to open yourself up to it. And it was a great affirmation of Sam also in his prescience that he said, a tongue inside the facts announces to the wind what every poet knows. The rest is history. The rest is prose. And I think that's absolutely correct. And perhaps the very best introduction to a reading of poetry by Sam Hazo is a small quatrain that he wrote many, many years ago. And it sort of rings in the ear because he calls it Preface to a Poetry Reading. But since Sam doesn't read his poems, since he says his poems, the title is perhaps not correct. But it goes like this. Since eyes are deaf and ears are blind to words in all their ways, I speak the sounds I write, hoping you see what somehow stays unheard, and hear what never is quite clear at sight. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to the first poet laureate of the state of Pennsylvania and a great friend, Sam Hazo.
Thank you. Since eyes are deaf and ears are blind to words in all their ways, I speak the sounds I write, hoping you see what somehow stays unheard and hear what never is quite clear at sight. Can you hear me, by the way? I wrote that poem more than 20, 30 years ago. But I thought it would be as good an introduction to what I will try to do tonight. So I said I would say it to you, and I'll say it again, just to make the point. Since eyes are deaf and ears are blind to words in all their ways, I speak the sounds I write, hoping you see what somehow stays unheard and hear what never is quite clear at sight. Mary Lou McLaughlin asked me if I would open with this particular poem. The fact that her name is McLaughlin has nothing to do with it. It anticipates St. Patrick's Day by just a little under a month, but I will accommodate her and say it. I'd like to open the program with it. I've been to Ireland twice only, and I was never attracted to the touristy Ireland. The Ireland that I saw when I went there was the Ireland of history and literature, Yeats, Seamus Heaney, Lionel Johnson, all of them. That was to me, the deeper and truer Ireland. This poem is called "The Real Reason for Going is Not Just to Get There." By the way, when I was in the west of Ireland, I noticed that many of the houses had only one window. And I asked the guide who was with me, I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because the British taxed them if they had excessive windows." I guess they wanted to keep the population with a sense of incarceration. Of course, the Irish resisted, as they will always, and as any people will that is occupied. It'll take time, but eventually they will win. Well, as it turned out, the Irish did win. It took centuries, and Edmund Spenser, no less, the poet laureate of the so-called Virgin Queen, Elizabeth, said, "The Irish must be subdued, but first they must be starved." And they starved them. I think one of the most moving things I ever saw was a trip that Kennedy had flown to a NATO meeting in Europe. On the way back, he insisted that they stop in Ireland. Kenny O'Donnell, his assistant, said, "Why do you want to do that? You have the Irish vote locked up anyway." He said, "No, let's stop in Ireland." So they stopped. I have never seen a population greet another human being the way they greeted Jack Kennedy. There's a film of it, by the way. You can see it anytime. You can pick it up. There's also a book about it. But it's amazing. Here was a man whose grandparents, the Fitzgeralds and the Kennedys, left Ireland between 1840 and 1860 because of the potato famine. They came to Boston. And here, less than 100 years later, the descendant of those immigrants was the President of the United States. It's amazing. And he looked down when he was speaking in the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, and who was sitting in the first row but Eamon de Valera, the first President of Ireland. The only one of all of the Irish leadership that the British did not shoot. And why? Because he was born in Boston, and they didn't want trouble with the American government. And here he was, Eamon de Valera, listening to Jack Kennedy in the Dáil. The real reason for going is not just to get there. Killarney's maps are for the unredeemed. The hidden land awaits the stumblers and the temporarily confused who find their destinations as they go. In Dingle, there's a history bone final as the faith that founded Gallerus. All that remains is what was there when Gallerus began: God, man, sheep, and stone, and stone, and stone. Dingles ago, the starvers saw their lips turn green from chewing grass before they famished in their beds. Their hovels bleached like tombs, unroofed and riven by the sea. If only all the stones were beige or marble white. Their fading grays seem unforgiving as a fate that only wit or tears or immigration can defeat. Sheep graze over graves. Loud gulls convene on garbage dumps. In Galway, Cashel, and Tralee, I fish the air for what it is that makes the Irish Irish. Is it Seamus quoting Sweeney's prayer in Howth and telling me of Hopkins, the convert, buried in Glasnevin? Is it how it sounds to sing the music in a name? Skibbereen, Balbriggan, Kilbeggan, Bunratty, Listowel, Duncannon, Fermanagh, and Ballyconneely. Is it Joyce's map of metaphors that makes all Dublin mythical as Greece? Is it cairns of uniambic and unrhyming rocks transformed by hand into the perfect poem of a wall? Is it the priest near death who said, "Give my love to Roscommon," and the horses of Roscommon? Is it because the Irish pray alike for Pope John Paul, Archbishop Eamon, and Ned O'Toole, late of Moycullen? Inside God's house or out, their sadder smiles say, the world, if given time, will break your heart. With such a creed, they should believe in nothing but the wisdom of suspicion. Instead, they say, please God, and fair ahead, regardless of the odds, to prove that life and God deserve at least some trust, some fearlessness, some courtesy. This next poem is into Europe. I was reading at the time a book called Travels in Italy by the German poet Goethe. He was never quite happy in Germany, and the Germans, you know, when they leave for a vacation, they go south. They don't go to Norway. They go south, sometimes as far as Egypt. Well, he went to Italy. When he got there, he said, at last, the human race. And he wrote this book. It's about the size of a metropolitan telephone book. Anyway, I read it, and I was very impressed to have someone as distinguished as a German poet say, at last, the human race. I was telling my friend Mike Aquilina that I had read a phrase that I liked, and I told him what it was, and he said, you know, that's on a plaque in the city of Positano. And I think it was your son who was on his honeymoon in Positano, and Mike told him to take a picture of this plaque. And he did. It's a round plaque. And it says, Al giorno del ultimo giustizio, quando tutti andranno al paradiso, per Re Amalfitani sarà un giorno come tutti gli altri, on the day of the last judgment, when everyone is going to paradise. For the people of Amalfi, just another day. That says it all, doesn't it? Well, here's the poem. October's ochre changes everything to Italy. Sun-painted walls remember villas near Fiesole. I've never seen Fiesole. Someday I will, and it will seem like noon in the United States when I became a Florentine because the sun bewildered me. Who among the Florentines is listening? Who else but me, who sees in the Italians the human race that Goethe saw? Today their cops are commodores, their Fiats, weapons and their whizzing duels on the road, their shoes and gloves, the very renaissance of calf. Tribal to the death, they swear by their mothers, breastfeed their sons wherever, prefer their pasta 3/4 cooked, and sing whatever, whenever. Mistaken for Italian half my life, I'm of the tribe. If it's Italian to speak in tears before goodbyes, I qualify. If it's Italian to choose tomatoes one by one, I qualify. If it's Italian to laugh when no one else is laughing, or to whistle at the wheel, I qualify. One murmur in Italian soothes the Florentine in me that French confuses, German contradicts, and Spanish misses by a hair. One murmur, and I feel what Goethe felt when Florence wounded him with Italy for life, though Goethe spent not quite 3 hours there. Farther across the Mediterranean. I was invited by the State Department on what is called their American Specialist Program to give some talks in Lebanon and in Jerusalem and in Egypt and in Greece. Well, in Beirut, we decided that we were going to drive from Beirut to Jerusalem. Well, you drive first to Damascus and then you go due south through the Syrian desert, passing at one point what I was told is the lowest point below sea level on the face of the earth, near Jericho, and then you drive up to Jerusalem. This poem is a record of that trip. But before I say it, I received an email about a week ago from a Duquesne alumna. As you know, or some of you may not know, but Duquesne University sent out a notice about this evening to all the alumni everywhere, that they could watch it on, what is it, streaming, is that it? So this alumna said, it's been a long time since we've seen one another. She's now been 45, 50 years almost. She's now the president of the American University in Kuwait. So with your permission, her name is Fadwa Awad. So Fadwa, this is for you. As I drive south to Christ and Abraham, the tires speed the desert road before me back to Syria. The clocks have stopped. Only the sky turns modern when a jet veers eastward for Bombay. Beneath its powered wings stand sheep and Bedouin. The sun blinks at me from a donkey's eye exactly as it blinked 8 centuries ago on tribes of Arabs armed to purge the last crusader from Jerusalem. How many bones survive? How many skulls did Timberlane leave stacked in pyramids where Bedouin fork wheat against the wind and watch it fall? I squint for evidence. The deadness of the sea near Jericho unscrolls no secrets, and the sand endures for wind alone to sift and rearrange and blow the smell of Briton, Frenchman, Turk, and Mongol to the sun. The time is what it was when Sarah laughed the angel back to God. The shepherds wait for Christ. The tribes of Canaan graze their camels near the road. I conquer like a new crusader, armed with film and cigarettes, nursed on the blood of Europe's cross and Europe's rack. I search for what was here before the world moved west. A donkey blinks. Bedouin cane their sheep. A child cries until his mother plumps her breast against him, thumbs the nipple firm, and plugs the blind mouth, mute as history. That's a good transition to these next poems, which are all about women in one way or another. It's taken me 93 years to realize fully that women may be the better gender. I mean, look at what the male of the species has done to us in the past 60 years. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. This poem is called The Bodies of Women. Some say they just reflect the nightly love of the sea and the moon. But life and physiology have never rhymed. Think of the squat queen who tranced Mark Antony and Caesar. Think of those two. I often think they never knew what hit them. All those who say that women are not what we say they are should think of nurses in their white, sure, soft shoes, nimble as prancers in motion, and just as self-possessed. Such poise and prowess is the stuff of mystery. And mystery it is. What else but mystery imbues a woman of stature to subdue a mob with nothing but a stance or a stare, or tells why men or countrymen can languish with their goddess gone. Learning of Edith Piaf's death, Cocteau decided not to live. For what? For a lifelong waif whose voice was France for half a century. And what of Kulthum, who stilled the Arab world each time she sang and drew 4 million to her funeral? Is this bewitchery? Or is it something that will never have a name? Or does it simply mean that women live within their bodies to the end and past the end? Not so for men, who seem to leave their bodies as they age, treating what was once an instrument as now a thing of no or little use. For those whose destination is themselves, what are such failings but a nuisance, not a destiny? Compared to love, or happiness, or children, they appear at best as vanities. See for yourselves. The eyes of any woman say it takes more bravery to be and bear than to beget. Or finally, just be, with no defenses, no illusions, no regrets. Toasts for the likes of two. Who was it said, if women had mustaches, they would somehow make them beautiful? Who disagrees? Doesn't the Bible say a woman just an inch from death will keep an eye for color? And don't philosophers conclude that women sacrifice the ultimate on beauty's altar, or love's? Why scoff at that? Are the male gods of money, fame, and power more deserving? What's money but guilt? What's fame but knowing people you will never know will know your name? What's power but pride, translated into force? Are these worth more than what presumes us to the end? Consider Bertha, 80, blind and diabetic. She believed that Death's real name was Harold. I want to know what Harold has to offer, she would say. She'd seen her children's children's children and believed she had a poet's right to give a name to death, if so she chose. So, laughing, she rocked and waited for this last adventure in her life. And then there was Jane, who mothered 7 and left unfinished all her art by choice, as if to prove that incompleteness is the rule of life, where nothing ends the way it should, or when. 2 weeks before her funeral, she called all 7 to her bed to say, "I hope to see you all again, but not right away." So here's to the honor of Bertha, and here's to the glory of Jane. May they be spoken of wherever beauty's lovers gather to applaud the beauty of love. May they not rest in peace, but thrive in everlasting action, doing what they love the most. Who wants a heaven that's equivalent to one long sleep? Those cryptid supine saints in their basilicas can keep the dream of their Jerusalem. The soul was meant for more than that. Pray for us, Saint Bertha. Pray for us, Saint Jane. This poem is simply called Cack. It was my Aunt Catherine. We called her Aunt Catherine, then Aunt Kathy, then Aunt Khaki, then Khaki, then just Cack. After my mother died, when my brother and I were still under 6, I was about 5.5, and Bob was about almost 3. And my dad was, he made his living as a traveling merchant. So my mother, from what I was told, asked my aunt to raise us. And she did. She was the bravest woman, and most unselfish woman, and the frankest woman I ever saw in my life. One time when I had gotten a job, I went out, I bought myself a suit, my first suit. I came in and I said, "Cack, how do I look?" She said, "Well, you're not ugly, but blue is not your color." She also came back one evening and said, "Sam, I met a very lovely girl this evening. Her name is Mary Ann. You should get to meet her. She's not like the other ones you take out. Done." She was right, by the way. Her heroines were Paula Negri, Gloria Swanson, and Mae West. One for style, one for glamour, one for nerve. First on her scale of praise came courage of the heart, then something called in Arabic light-bloodedness. All birds but owls she loved, all that was green and growable, including weeds. All operas in Italian, the schmaltzier the better. Lightning she feared, then age, since people thought the old unnecessary, then living on without us, then absolutely nothing. Each time I'd say some girl had perfect legs, she'd tell me with a smile, "Marry her legs." Or if I found some project difficult, she said, "Your mother Lottie mastered Greek in 7 months." Or once, when Roger Maris bested Babe Ruth's home runs by 1, she said, "Compared to Ruth, who's Harris?" Crying while she stitched my shirt, she said, "You don't know what to suffer is until someone you love is suffering to death. And what can you do?" On principle, she told one bishop what she thought of him. On personality, she called one global thinker temporarily insane. She dealt a serious hand of poker, voted her last vote for Kennedy, and wished us a son a year before he came. She prayed that she would never die in bed, and never she did. When you and your brother were young and I was working, she said, then was I happy. The falderall of funerals disgusted her enough to say, I'm telling no one when I die. And she didn't. And she didn't. One night, she jotted down in longhand on a filing card, I pray to God that I'll be with you always. And she is. Something I just thought of. My aunt died in January of 1966. In December of 1965, she sent Marianne and me a Christmas card. Now, we were living in the same house. Marianne insisted on that. When we got married, she said, she's staying with us, and that's it. How many wives do you know who will say that? Anyway, we opened this Christmas card. All it said was, I hope you have a son next year. That was December 65. January 1966, she died. November 1966, our son was born. We wanted children for 10 years. Nothing happened. We went to doctors, all that. And never came close before or after. But I've never gotten that card out of my mind. This is a subject you are not going to like. But I think we have soft-pedaled it too long. These are not political statements. They're statements of fact. From 1950 until now, we've been engaged in about 8 wars, only one of which was ever approved by Congress, and that was the one to liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein's invasion. And he got that, George H.W. Bush got that by 2 votes. 2 votes. Every other war was never approved congressionally, and our Constitution says that the Congress of the United States is the only body that can approve war, commit this country to war. It's explicit. Didn't happen in Korea. Korea remains divided. It didn't happen in Nicaragua during, what do they call it? When Oliver North was buying. Well, anyway, it'll come to me. It didn't happen in Grenada. It didn't happen in Lebanon. It didn't happen in Vietnam. It didn't happen in Iraq and Afghanistan. In Afghanistan and Iraq alone, we have already lost 32,000 wounded and killed. So it's 85,000 killed from 1950 until this minute. It's infuriating. Especially when you know, and it's now common knowledge, that Vietnam was intensified because of the so-called Tonkin Gulf incident, which never happened. It was a lie. And that Iran was supposed to have nuclear weapons, which they never had, and which the president knew from Hans Blix, the UN inspector, who spent 5 months there. Think of that. All those people died for a lie. I'll tell you one other sad fact. At the turn of the century, the suicide rate among veterans was in the single digits. From 2017 until now, it's 22 a day. A day, that's almost one an hour. A lot of these are just numbers. They're undeniable numbers, but they're numbers. I did not feel this personally until I said this poem, I think it was probably about over 15 years ago in Pittsburgh, and a young lady came up afterward and said to me, "That poem is about my dad." I said, "Well, if his name was Ray Fagan, it was about your dad." And she said, "Well, that's my dad. My name is Charlene Fagan." And he never talked to us at all about what happened to him during the war, or about what happened to anybody during the war. Here's the poem. The Ballad of the One-Legged Marine. My left leg was gone, with the boot still on, the boot I had laced in the morning. I felt like a boy who had stepped on a toy and made it explode without warning. They choppered me back to a medical shack with no one but corpsmen to heed me. I stared at the sky and I prayed I would die. And I cursed when the nurse came to feed me. I knew that I must, so I tried to adjust while orderlies hurried to teach me the will of the crutch and the skill of the cane, and assured me their methods would reach me. The president came with his generals tame and explained why he never relieved us. But the red, white, and blue of my lone right shoe told the world how he lied and deceived us. They buried my shin and my bones and my skin an ocean away from this writing, but pain has a way on each given day to take me straight back to the fighting when I served with the Corps in a slaughterhouse war, where we counted our killings like cattle, as if these explain why the armies of Cain behave as they do in a battle. Whatever's a bore you can learn to ignore, but a leg's not a limb you like leaving. So you live with regret and attempt to accept what always is there for the grieving. If you look for a clue when I stand in a queue, you can't tell what's real from prosthetic. I walk with a dip that begins at my hip, but I keep it discreet and aesthetic. If you're ordered online and you step on a mine, you learn what it means to be only a name on a chart with a hook in your heart and a life that turns suddenly lonely. Lose arms and you're left incomplete and bereft. Lose legs and you're fit for a litter. Lose one at the knee and you're just like me, with night after night to be bitter. This next poem is a very short poem. Stop Me Cold. It wrote itself. I was watching a television program funded by the actor James Gandolfini, who has since died. But he funded this program and invited mothers, wives, and sisters of men who had been killed in action. And most of them were in tears, most of them, it was hard to listen to. One woman said what made this poem. It's called No Words for This. This is exactly what she said. If a true poem is one you wish you never had to write, then this is it. Don't read it just to say you've read it. That's like the traveler who went to Spain so he could say he went to Spain. The words I've picked have really picked themselves. But what's not here is where the poem breathes. The mother of a captain killed by snipers read his final letter, postmarked on the day he died. She read it often after that. Each time she closed the envelope, she slowly licked it shut so that her tongue could taste him in the last thing he ever touched. You find often the same impersonality in what is called the capitalist world. I always wince when I hear somebody say, "How much is he worth?" You've heard that, haven't you? You know what it means. How much money does he have? Or she, doesn't matter. But the consequences of that, philosophically speaking, are terrible. It means if you have no money, you have no worth. You're not worth anything. The fact that you're a human being means nothing. It doesn't factor into dollars and cents. There are people who think like that, by the way, in the same way that they think about soldiers, Marines, sailors, wherever they are, as numbers. Assets is the word they use. We don't have assets in the region. These are people who work primarily because they want to earn enough money so that they won't have to work. It has educational implications that I'll talk about in just a minute. This is called the Ballad of the Jolly Broker. Nothing was surer amid all the furor than watching a stock that I picked on a hunch make rich men of paupers and paupers of fools, and all in the pinch that it took to eat lunch. My betting and cheering took real engineering. I guessed and I gauged and I bet and I prayed from the dawn of the bull to the dusk of the bear, where fortunes were waiting and fortunes were made. The law of percents is a law that resents whenever its buyouts is less than a steal. Its language is money, and money is lethal. And all that makes sense is the luck of the deal. You have to like poker to be a good broker. You have to take chances and hope for the best. Buy cheap and sell dear is the law of the market. And woe unto those who forget or protest. Like any good broker, I like to play poker. But poker's a game where all that you've got is the lure of the cards and the stack of the chips and the dice of the deal and the pay of the pot. I took all my winnings, that some called my sinnings, and lived like a king where the snow never fell. I drank all my juices and swallowed my pills and bet on the races, and down came hell. It cost me my wife in the prime of my life. It made me content with much less than the best. I worked for the day when I never would work. And the money was sure, and the honey was rest. If you'd rather be healthy than feeble and wealthy, if you'd rather be happy than wed to a bed, then think of a man with a millionaire's tan who died half a lifetime before he was dead. Would you like to hear a few more? I don't want to impose on you. Yeah. Is there 2 or 3 more? Would that be all right? Okay. This poem, I mentioned earlier about my reservation about modern education, especially higher education. Universities are more like training schools now. You know, you go there to get a degree, you get a degree so you can get a job. That's not the purpose of education. The purpose is to discover yourself, to find out what you love to do, and pursue subjects or a field that is in keeping with that desire. If you don't, I don't care how your life turns out, you can fail. You might survive. You can't excel. And being promoted is not the same as excelling. I'm talking about personal excellence. If you choose what you love, both in academics and in life, you can't fail. You will survive. And you can excel. You have no choice. Choose what you love or fail. This poem I wrote, it's one of those fed-up poems. You know, you see things in society and you just have had it. I was delighted to see that Mrs. Humphrey has been made the president of Carlow University. I mean, here's a woman who says publicly that education has a spiritual dimension. She says that emphatically. She's not a Catholic, by the way. The president of a Catholic university, a minority. God, how the majority hates the minority. Here's the fed-up poem called To a Commencement of Scoundrels. My boys, we lied to you. The world, by definition, stinks of Cain, no matter what your teachers told you. Heroes and the fools of God may rise like accidental green on gray Saharas, but the sand stays smotheringly near. Deny me if you can. Already you are turning into manpower. Figures on a list of voters, earners, prayers, soldiers, payers, sums of population, tamed with forms, last name, middle name, first name, home address, age, hobbies, experience. Tell them the truth. Your name is Legion. You are aged 1,000,000. Say you breathe between appointments, first day, last day. The rest is no one's business. Boys, the time is prime for prophecy. Books break down their book ends. Paintings burst their frames. The world is more than reason's peanut. Homer sang it real, Goya painted it, and Shakespeare staged it for the pelting rinds of every groundling of the globe. So wake up. Tonight, the lions hunt in Kenya. They can eat a man. Rockets are spearing through the sky. They can blast a man to nothing. Rumors prowl like rebellions. They can knife a man. No one survives for long, my boys. Flesh is always in season, lusted after, gunned, grenaded, tabulated through machines, incinerated, beaten to applause, anesthetized, autopsied, mourned. The blood of Troy beats on in Goya's paintings and the truce of Lear. Reason yourselves to that, my buckaroos, before you rage for God, country, and sis boom ba. You won't, of course. Your schooling left you trained to serve, like cocksure Paul, before God's lightning smashed him from his saddle. So, I wish you what I wish myself. Hard questions, and the nights to answer them. The grace of disappointment, and the right to seem the fool for justice. That's enough. Cowards might ask for more. Heroes have died for less. You all know the reference to Paul there, don't you? Paul was on the side of the Roman emperor, and writing from Jerusalem, God knocked him off his saddle, and he became St. Paul. There's another reference in an earlier poem about Sarah. I used the line, Sarah laughed the angel back to God. Do you remember that line? Well, Sarah was 90, and here comes this angel. The angels, they're always appearing at the wrong time in the Old and New Testament. So here comes this angel, and he said, Sarah, you're going to have a baby in 9 months. She's 90 years old. She laughed in his face. 9 months later, she has this baby boy. You know his name? Isaac. Isaac is derived from 3 words in either Hebrew or Arabic or Aramaic, meaning laughing. He's the son of laughing. Angel or no angel. I'll say 2 poems. This poem is going to be the title of my next book, which is coming out, I think, in the fall. Whether I'm here or not, it's coming out. And it's called The Less Said, the Truer. The less said, the truer. And the subtitle, it's the title of this poem. The subtitle of this poem, or the epigraph to this poem, is that love comes to women through the ear, to men through the eye. It's an old Arab proverb. Love comes to men through the eye, to women through the ear. Well, there's one reference in this poem. There was a young woman I knew, maybe a long time ago. She was a student at Wheaton College, and we met, and I was very impressed with her. You know, while other girls at Wheaton were going to Cape Cod or the Jersey Shore for the summer, she applied to go to an orphanage in Tunisia. She flies to Tunisia. She's met at the airport. The man says, I'm here to drive you to the interior, madame. She gets in the car. They drive for about 5 hours, stop one of these out of the way so-called hotels. One room. 20 men in that room. So Marianne asked her, weren't you a little nervous about that? She said, no, I thought there was safety in numbers. Anyway, she worked there that summer, liked it very much, went back the next summer. She meets a young Frenchman. He's in the equivalent of the French Peace Corps. And they were attracted to one another. Over the course of the summer, they fell in love. And as she was coming back, when she was about to come back, she called me and said, Sam, I'm bringing Maurice back to meet my father and mother, and I'd like for him to meet you and Marianne also. I said, sure, bring him over. So I told Marianne, I said, honey, Pamela's bringing this young boy that she's going to marry. She said, oh, Sam, these summer romances, they come and go. Don't get excited about it. So she wants you to meet him. I don't want to meet him. If I meet him and he leaves her, then I'll just feel terrible for her and I won't be able to face her. So, well, he's coming over. Comes over, I go to the door. There's this tall, handsome, young Frenchman. Monsieur Hazo? I said, yes. Je suis Maurice Izard. I'm honored to meet you. Pamela has told me so much about you. I go back into the kitchen. I said, Marianne, come on. He wants to meet you. I don't want to meet him. Well, I drag her out. She finally, she stands in front of him. Madame Hazo, how do you do? I am Maurice Izard. Pamela loves you and Monsieur very much, and she told me so much about you both. It's an honor for me to be in your home. He kissed her hand. She goes back into the kitchen. I said, what'd you think? I'd marry him if I'd live in a sewer. It's a straight quote, by the way. I'd marry him if I'd live in a sewer. The less said, the truer. When Cyrano proclaimed his passion for Roxanne, he stood in the shadows. Seated on her balcony, she never even saw the man, but loved what she heard. There's more to this than mere romance. All those who say that love is based on age, height, religion, status, worth, or race are talking mergers, not marriage. The man a thoughtful woman allows to enter her body needs more than these to qualify. It's what she hears or sees in his eyes that matters to her. Call it, for lack of an alternative, the language of the heart. Bill's wife-to-be spoke only Japanese. He felt what she meant, and their 30 years together prove it. I still remember that vividly. Their 30 years together prove it. When Anne met Pamela's French fiancé, she said, I'd marry him if I had to live in a sewer. Although her mother disapproved, Rebecca insisted, I'm not marrying my mother. 10 happy anniversaries later, she pleaded with guests, please, be nice to my mother. What else explains why Trish mounted a Harley-Davidson motorbike with Mark, who drove it at midnight through the rain from Pittsburgh to Washington with just one stop. For those who love, courage must excel. Deny that at your peril. I still remember vividly, and Ann, you know them. They're both attorneys now in Washington. They have a lovely family. One of them is a Marine officer and so forth. But it was raining so hard that night, if I held my hand here, I couldn't see it. Here's this girl getting on the back of this motorcycle with Mark Paletta, and he takes off for, I said, why do you have to go tonight? He said, we have to be at work at 9 in the morning. They drove all night. I mean, just picture that, it's 260 miles in the rain, on a motorcycle, stopping once. That's love or madness? This is the last poem. It's called And the Time Is. We come to the point of decision, and the hands of the clock say, be careful. We've learned from the past that our choices are one or the other or neither. And the hands of the clock say, be careful. We've readied ourselves for the challenge of weighing the odds and the chances of what will result from our choices. And the hands of the clock say, be hopeful. We're not what we were when we started. And the hands of the clock say, it's over. Our yesterdays lengthen like shadows that fade when we no longer cast them. And the hands of the clock say, it's over. Despite what it brings to surprise us, we treasure each day in its passing, though we know that we pass as it passes. And the hands of the clock say, discover. We sit on the porch every evening, and the hands of the clock say, be watchful. We study the leaves in their turning from green to vermilion to purple, and the hands of the clock say, be watchful. While we stare at the sky and its vastness and name every star in the distance, we dwindle to scale in the balance, and the hands of the clock say, be grateful. The dead come to life in our dreaming, and the hands of the clock say, remember. The words of a prophet keep haunting the ones who ignored him when living, and the hands of the clock say, remember. The world that we think is around us is neither before nor behind us, but always within us. Within us. And the hands of the clock say, forever. Thank you.
Sam, this has been a powerful evening. I knew it was going to be wonderful, but it surpassed everything I imagined. So thank you. This week, a book about your life was published by one of your former students, Janine Molinaro. The book is available here tonight. Before the pen runs dry, a literary biography of Samuel Hazo. As long as men seek to know themselves, she writes, and the world in which they live and move and have their being, poets will have something important to say. We've heard so much of it from Ireland and who the Irish are, to Italy, to women embodied to the very end. Through war and worthlessness and worth, to excel, hard questions, angels appearing at the wrong time, mergers, not marriages. The time is discover, be grateful, remember. I have to tell you, I, in preparation for this evening, read a lot of your poems, but especially the poems that you dedicated to your beloved wife, Mary Ann. And that brought home to me what we know poetry is all about. The cooperative and creative act of poetry parallels the creative act of God. And as I read your love story, over and over and over, I kept feeling in my heart my own love story. As a priest, as a celibate, you told my story as well, and that proves the universality of all poetry, what the world yearns for. Call it what you may, it's the language of the heart, you said. And for all of this, we are so very, very grateful. So my friends, can we one more time thank Sam for just a beautiful evening. There are 3 books available. I hope that you'll stop and browse or take one home with you. I hope you stay a while longer. Don't go home yet. Stay with us, and Sam and Ann and Mary Lou and the committee. Thank you again for attending.